This is outrageous. The fact that they shut down this investigation shows that there's something to hide. If there was nothing to see, Justin Trudeau should have welcomed this committee and allowed the committee members to get to the bottom of it.
Allegations of overreach by the Prime Minister's office were the focus of an emergency meeting here in Ottawa earlier. Members of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee discussed claims that the PMO unfairly pressured former diplomats over their public comments about China. Opposition MPs filed a motion to investigate further, but the Liberals rejected that motion. Take a listen.
It's a very difficult position for a public servant to be in when the Prime Minister's office calls and asks them to do something. These are serious allegations that merit an investigation. This Prime Minister has shown a pattern of behavior to attempt to silence anyone who would challenge or criticize the government's approach to anything.
I have seen the most unbelievable cascade of scandal and cover-up in my lifetime under this Prime Minister and under this PMO.
I am very distressed, actually, more distressed than I had been when I simply read the notice of motion at the tone, at the idea, and at the allegations that are being cast about by members of the opposition. Global Affairs Canada engages with people outside government all the time. There was no intention, nor was there any instruction from anyone, including the PMO, that Mr. Mulroney clear his public statements with the government.
MP Bayless. Nay. MP Saini.
Nay. The motion is defeated 5-4.
The emergency meeting was called after two former ambassadors to China said they were contacted by Global Affairs Canada and encouraged to speak with one voice on the China dispute. The Globe and Mail initially reported that. So what happened during those conversations? And does it amount to political interference? Guy Saint-Jacques served as Canada's ambassador to China from 2012 to 2016. He's now senior fellow at the University of Alberta's China Institute and joins us from Montreal via Skype. Hi, Mr. Saint-Jacques. Nice to see you again.
Nice to talking to you.
The Liberal members, Mr. Saint-Jacques, of the House Foreign Affairs Committee voted a little bit earlier today against a motion calling for the committee to conduct a study into the calls that both you and another former ambassador to China, David Mulroney, received from a senior global affairs official. Essentially, the motion was killed because of those votes. Your reaction to that?
Well, in a way, I'm not surprised, knowing that there is a Liberal majority. Of course, if I had been asked to go to Ottawa to testify, I would have been very happy to go and to meet with the members of the committee.
Do you think it's something that deserves further study? The idea that both of you were called and the nature of those calls?
Well, I'm not sure that it's worth pursuing because in my case, at least, I never felt that they were trying to muzzle me or that they were threatening me. I think basically it's another example of miscommunication. In this case, I don't know if the miscommunication happened when the Prime Minister's office asked Mr. Topol to phone me and David Mulroney, or if it was once it got into global affairs. But of course, when you get a call from a senior official that says that he wants to relay a message from the Prime Minister's office, your curiosity is piqued. And I was looking forward to hear more about what they had in mind. And of course, I'm all in favor of trying to reinforce the actions of the government to try to free Mr. Spaver and Mr. Kovrig. I have offered suggestions in the past about what the strategy the Canadian government should follow. I will be happy to do that in the future. But when I spoke with Mr. Topol, I said, if you are telling me that we should speak with one voice, it would be useful for me to know more about the strategy pursued by the government, because at this stage, I'm not clear on what it is exactly, apart from the fact that we are seeking support from allies. And this is a suggestion that I made back in December to people at Global Affairs, and I think it has worked. And we should continue with this, but at the same time, we should recognize that we will need more than that if only because the extradition process of Mrs. Meng could take years. And China is an authoritarian country that will want to continue to punish us. We already suffer. We have lost at least $5 billion in sales. Canadian farmers have received a tremendous hit by the sanctions taken by China. And therefore, any effort that can be done to try to resolve the problem, I'm all in favor, and I'm very supportive, but I would need to know more about exactly what I can do. And if I have said anything that folks at the Prime Minister's office didn't like, well, I would like them to contact me directly and discuss the issue.
So what did he say when you said that? When you said, I'd like to know more about the strategy, and if I've done something to aggravate the Prime Minister's office, contact me directly. What was his response?
Well, he couldn't give me any specific example. I think they were more concerned about some of the remarks of my former colleague, David Mulroney. David had spoken. In fact, he had been very outspoken on the travel advisory, saying that Canadians should refrain from going to China, that businessmen should go there only if they need to, if there's an urgent issue, but that Canadian tourists should go to other places where you have freedom of expression and where the government has not put a million Uyghur in jail. And so... but Paul was, he also said that if I were to go to Ottawa, it would be useful for me to meet with the new Deputy Minister of Global Affairs. And I said I would be happy to sit with Mrs. Morgan to offer views on how to manage the crisis. And I can tell you also that I have had two subsequent conversations with people at Global Affairs after the call of Mr. Topol to reassure me that nobody wanted to muzzle me, that in fact they appreciated the advice that I had provided, and that they look forward to future contacts. So again, for me, while I remain perplexed by the conversation I had with Mr. Topol, I think basically it was a problem of communication.
And were those follow-up calls from other senior level bureaucrats, or were they from the minister, for example, or was it people just within Global Affairs?
Well, one was with a senior official, and the other one was what I would call at a very appropriate level. Can I try and read between the lines? Is that a politician then versus a bureaucrat? Yes, it was a politician. And are you uncomfortable sharing if it was the minister or the prime minister? Well, I would need to seek the permission to reveal the details of this conversation, but I was completely reassured that nobody wanted to muzzle me. And in fact, I was told that freedom of expression was very important, and that therefore I should continue to express my views as freely as I wish. So let me just pick up on that last point. I'm just wondering, based, Mr. Saint-Jacques, on your experience, the opposition is contending that there was an attempt by invoking the Prime Minister's office and by talking about the election environment in the call with Mr. Mulroney, as Mr. Mulroney has recounted, that there is sort of an attempt of inappropriate political interference. Was the Prime Minister's office invoked specifically in your conversation, and what about the election environment? Well, as I said earlier, at the outset of the conversation, Mr. Topol said that he was phoning me to pass on a message and a request from the Prime Minister's office. And the request was to try to speak with one voice. But I must say, in the conversation that I had, I don't recall any mention of the upcoming election. This being said, I'm not surprised by the reaction of the Conservative Party. I think if I were in their shoes, I would probably do the same and try to make hay of anything. But again, for me, I think it's. I don't think that there will be much of a follow-up to this. Of course, I would like to get more clarity on where this miscommunication occurred. But again, I was reassured by the calls that I received after the initial conversation with Mr. Topol on July 22nd, and I'm ready to continue to work with people in Ottawa to try to find ways to manage this crisis with China.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. Saint-Jacques. Really appreciate your time as always this afternoon.
Thank you.
MPs will not be investigating allegations that a government official inappropriately pressured two foreign Canadian diplomats. Last week, former Canadian ambassadors to China, David Mulroney and Guy Saint-Jacques, said they were called by a global affairs official speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister's office. They say the official suggested they coordinate with the government before speaking publicly on the contentious China file. Liberals on a House of Commons committee voted down a proposed study into the allegations, insisting no ministerial direction was given. Conservatives say it amounts to another cover-up in the vein of the SNC-Lavalin affair. So what is really at play politically here? The Power Panel is with us to discuss. Tiffany Gooch is a political consultant and columnist. She joins us from Toronto. Here with me in studio, Françoise Boivin is a political commentator and former NDP MP. And Tim Powers is Vice Chair of Summa Strategies. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Nice to see you. And I will add to that, just for our viewers that might be joining us now, that Mr. Saint-Jacques, who also received a call, said that the Prime Minister's office was invoked, said that shortly following that, he got a call from another bureaucrat, and then what turned out to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, to say, we are not trying to assure you, we are not trying to muzzle you. You can speak freely. Still, get your response first, Tiffany. I mean, there's a reason that this is still being discussed, at least politically, here on the Hill. Mr. Saint-Jacques did confirm, as Mr. Mulroney said, that the Prime Minister's office was initially invoked in that call, and that although Mr. Mulroney said the election environment was discussed or brought up, that it was, Mr. Saint-Jacques said it was not with him. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what you think, from a political perspective, how this plays out.
Yeah, so I think much ado about almost nothing here. I think we're definitely in a space where it would make sense for each of those offices to be looking to collaborate and ensure that there is consistency in messaging and understanding among all of the players of what's taking place. And I think a good stakeholder strategy would ensure that former diplomats are engaged, what that engagement looks like, that how periodic that is, who that's coming from, is all up in play. And I think this is a case of a miscommunication of in one case of something that was intended to ensure some sense of understanding from all players that are going to be speaking to this in the public, but not necessarily meant to be directive. And so I think this is not something, with the exception of those that are trying to make it more of a political issue in the summer and lead up to an election, isn't such that.
There's nothing in the resumes or repository of history that we know about Mr. Saint-Jacques or Mr. Mulroney to say that they're looking to make something out of nothing. They have nothing politically to gain here. Neither is looking to run in the election. Neither is known to be affiliated with the New Democrats or the Conservatives or anything like that, albeit I think Mr. Mulroney was appointed when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, but he would be among many diplomats. So there's nothing for them to gain in all of this, except to make the bigger point, and I think Mr. Saint-Jacques has made it well. Look, we are often putting ourselves out there as this virtuous democracy that allows free speech and allows differences of opinion, and we're calling down China. And guess what? We're trying to use moral suasion to do it, and then you come out. Tiffany calls it stakeholder engagement, maybe, but it's a fundamental misread of the people that they're talking about and not understanding the potential backlash. That report of Minister Freeland calling after the fact is like the minister saying, can I have my duct tape back now that you wouldn't put on? There might be one other thing to this, and you'll remember this, Vashi, as will Tiffany and Francois. It was about 2 weeks ago, National Post columnist John Ivison wrote a real interesting piece about frustration in the foreign affairs community among senior diplomats with some of the way the government conducts foreign policy. I'm beginning to wonder if this is bubbling its way in there too, because as the government gets a bit embarrassed about this, it does force a rethink of the way they engage with China. And a lot of people in foreign affairs, as Ivison and others have reported, want the government to have a bit of a rethink. So there might be another element to this story.
Well, it was interesting. Mr. Saint-Jacques sort of underscored all his comments today, which weren't highly critical. I mean, he was not. I think he sort of believes that there was a communication failure. He wants more details on that, but he took Chrystia Freeland at her word. I think he said that she said he was completely reassured that nobody wanted to muzzle me. In fact, I was told that freedom of expression was very important, and therefore I should continue to express my views as freely as I wish. I mean, it's sort of the hard thing to, I guess, grasp, Françoise, is that it's essentially all on this one diplomat who apparently went too far, but did very specifically say he was acting on the direction of the Prime Minister's office. Then at the same time, you have the government saying we did not, and they're insisting we did not give that direction. So it's kind of boils down to something that's hard to figure out what the facts are.
And we'll probably never know, that's for sure. So those who want to say that it was an attempt to muzzle will continue believing it. Those who say no or drank the liberal Kool-Aid will say absolutely not. It was just to make sure there's two guys who are held in China. The situation is serious, and we all agree with that. It just goes to prove how much everything is political. So we cannot say this is not political. It was. The fact that it made the paper, the newspaper, made it political. It could have happened and nobody said nothing and nobody would know nothing, but somebody was afraid, and probably rightfully so. These ambassadors have a lot of experience. They dealt with numerous government of any shape, form, of any kind of political affiliation. So they know the games that are being played. I'm sure on the government side, when they let their MPs go and all the civil servant and so on, the main focus is to say, make no wave, be quiet, be nice, hope the summer goes without a cinch, make sure that there's no drama that we'll have to answer, because that might make 2-3 good news days, and people will link it to SNC Lavallee, same type of procedure.
Well, that's what I want to.
So that's what
I'm interested in quickly, Tim, and I'll get Tiffany as well. Like the line that the Conservatives are trying to draw here is that it's the same thing as SNC, that it's political interference, right? Yeah. Do you think the public will buy that?
I guess the duct tape's going to be sent to me now, because no, I think that's a stretch of great proportions. But that's what oppositions do, because that was so topical. But I do think there's a real quick key point there that Francois made that hasn't come out. How clinical the Chinese have been at trying to exploit Canadian divisions, and how clumsy we have been. We talked about how when we were on this program before and said things that were somewhat critical of the government, the Chinese state network came to get a couple of us on their program. Our guys in foreign affairs and gals in foreign affairs need to be paying attention to how clinical the Chinese are, and be very careful in not feeding in to our own possibility for making mistakes. And I think mistakes were made here in that outreach. It was clumsy.
Tiffany, last word to you.
Yeah, I think definitely a political piece for the Conservatives to invoking whatever gives a chance to repeat the messaging that they think is going to help resonate for whatever their hopes and goals are for the election in the next little while. So I wasn't surprised to hear that messaging repeated in this week and tied to this, but I think that was another piece that helped me understand that it was being hijacked into something of that sort. So I see this as getting to be closed.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.